Kevin Gordon here from Autosavant, coming to you from the 2014 Mitsubishi Outlander. This is the Outlander GT V6 with the super all-wheel control system. It's a car that, to be honest with you, has sort of I've been torn about during the time that we've spent with it, and I think I remain a bit torn, and here's why. Mitsubishi, of course, is going through all their troubles as a brand, right? They keep shrinking and losing models. Their dealer network's not all that big. So you do sort of want them to succeed, right? They did bring us amazing cars in the multiple versions of the Evo. So the redesign for 2014 Mitsubishi Outlander, when you look at it from the outside, right, they've managed to make it more slippery. It's got a much better coefficient of drag than the old version. It's lighter than the old version. It gets better fuel economy than the old version. And they say they've done a lot of work to update interior materials and like the nav and those types of things. The issue winds up being is when they say next generation nav, for example, about the navigation system, it sort of feels like they mean second generation nav, not what would probably be in the modern world like 8th or 9th generation navigation. You know, it's maps by Navtech. It really does feel like, I think a fair number for it is the better systems were in 2008, which 2008 doesn't seem all that far away, but in technology terms, 5 years ago is, millennium. As I mentioned, this is the GT model of the full-size Outlander, not the Outlander Sport. It winds up being a 7-passenger, 3-row SUV with the, also on top of the GT model, the GT Touring package, which gets you basically every available option you can get with it. And here's where things start to get twisted a little bit. It's the fact that the Outlander, even though it does feel a bit dated, interior materials in here aren't quite up to what you're going to find best in class. The layouts, just like sort of the ergonomics of the car, feel a few years old at this point, even though it's, redesigned newer model for 2014. It is a bit of a bargain. For $34,000 as this one comes in, you do get an enormous amount of content. You also get something that can fit 7 people in a pinch and gets decent gas mileage. I think the numbers are 20 in the city, 28 in the highway, with a 23 combined number, which is actually pretty good given the size of this. Where does it fall from a competition perspective? Well, amazingly, from a pricing perspective, it winds up sort of falling against these compact SUVs that are out there, but in feature set and size and seating capability and storage capacity, it winds up falling more towards sort of the mid-size SUVs. What I would say is the Kia Sorento and the Hyundai Santa Fe really are its most like for like in sort of size, dimension, capacity, and those types of quantifiable measures. Powering the Outlander GT V6 is the 3-liter V6 that's a carryover from last year, but here's the weird thing. What Mitsubishi decided to do was actually take away a few horsepower, and I think maybe it makes one more foot-pound of torque. It's at 224 and 215, 224 horsepower and 215 foot-pounds of torque, and they added lightness. The old Lotus joke of, increase simplicity, add lightness to increase performance. Performance being increased might be a bit of a stretch in all honesty. The performance in this doesn't feel bad. It's probably just about an 8-second 0 to 60 car, but it isn't anywhere near dynamic. Now, when you speak about dynamic, the one thing that is important to mention is, of course, this car's got Mitsubishi's S-AWC with the active front differential. So super, because all-wheel control wouldn't be enough. It's got to be super dash all-wheel control with the active front differential. And as a result, the thing that winds up being true about it is if you sort of stick it onto an on-ramp getting onto the highway and stomp on it, this thing does manage to sort of rip itself around the corner. The other thing it has is a more natural steering feel than you might find in a lot of its competition. And even though the materials in here feel a bit dated in all honesty, it's true they've added soft touch where soft touch should be, But this stuff still down here is still all scratchy hard plastic, and the gear shift knob feels a little bit weird to use. It still has a low range, even though all that does is lock into first and second gear, which you have paddle shifters for. And by the way, as lane departure warning, the paddle shifters, by the way, again, Mitsubishi deserves to be commended. They do paddle shifters correctly, right? They're mounted to the steering column, not the wheel, so they're always in the same place as you turn the wheel of the car. They're also big magnesium things that feel quite good to the hands. The behavior of them attached to the 6-speed automatic that's in the Outlander GT is fine. You know, it's not exactly the fastest of 6-speed transmissions you're going to find out there. It's sometimes hesitant to downshift into gears, and there's no actually sort of manual mode to the transmission, which means I, at least, and I'm sure our genius commenters out there will help me out if I'm getting this one wrong, but I, at least to date, haven't been able to figure out a way to put it in its sort of manual mode, come to a complete stop, and pull away again with it still being in manual mode. Every time you come to a complete stop, it seems to put itself back into drive. While the interior materials and sort of quality in here might not be up to what's best in class, the one thing I will say they've done a very nice job with is the actual ergonomics from a seating position. You know, the seat is comfortable, it's firm, the steering wheel's in a great position, the pedals feel good where it falls to. From an actual driving perspective, it really winds up being a very pleasant thing. Those electronics and all the things that you get with the GT Touring package, let's talk a little bit more about that. So that's a $6,000 option on top of, obviously, a less than $30,000 base price for the all-wheel drive V6 version. That's very good value for money, and actually the $6,000 option to get to the Touring package gets you piles of content. It gets you nav, it gets you a fantastic upgraded 710-watt Rockford Fosgate stereo. What I would say about the stereo is it, you know, acoustically perfect? No, nowhere near it, but it is raw, it has piles of power, and really it's as close in a factory car you can get to something that if you called up Crutchfield and started buying parts, you'd wind up with. And it's fully integrated, built into the car, all the stuff really works. It also, of course, has lane departure warning, which I will say is nowhere near the most advanced of the systems out there, but it definitely tells you if you drive towards the line and you're in lane departure warning, you know, speeds, which we are now, so let's check. And yes, of course, it beeps when I cross over white lines. But the thing I think is most interesting about the technology options on this car is it comes with radar-guided cruise control and collision prevention. The radar-guided cruise is actually one of the better systems that we've experienced. It's got a decent following distance. When people merge into that following distance, it doesn't like abruptly slam on the brakes to create a natural distance again. It does that slowly. There's a bit of binging and bonging that goes on with it that I haven't figured out how to turn off, which gets a little tiring. But, I don't know. I've been doing a little bit of looking and maybe I missed one, but I think for $34,000, it might be one of the cheapest cars you can get with radar-guided cruise if it's important to you. It, of course, also has one of those safety features where during slower speed exercises, it will start to apply the brakes for you and go all the way up to panic braking. The other thing that I can report is that it has the system that if you very quickly move your foot from the gas to the brake, it starts to apply hardcore braking force. I may have been rolling along a back road reasonably quickly, going over some of the officially termed in America VASCAR lines, which is where they paint two lines on the road and then a cop sits there with the stopwatch and times the time it takes you to get across them to give you a speeding ticket. Well, I noticed that there was a local officer sitting at one of those things, and even though I didn't go to stomp on the brakes, I did obviously move very quickly from the gas pedal to the brake pedal, and you are then, once you touch the gas pedal, basically in full ABS panic stopping. Because there's ABS, there was no squealing, and I didn't get a ticket. So, can't complain too much there, and it is sort of a nice feature that it's really loading up the brakes so much when that's happening. The last thing I want to talk about before we wrap this thing up is the interior space and sort of the seating, the rest of the practicality of the package of the Outlander, the full-size Outlander GT. And what I would say there is front seats feel good. Like I mentioned, the second row seats are actually very spacious and do a good job of sliding. This one does have the third row of seats, which really would only be good to torture your friends or put small children in. But compared to, say, the Kia Sorento that we recently had the chance to review, I would say that actually it does better from a storage space behind the third row. It also does a better job of having rear seat leg room with the third row folded down. So, it's a pretty practical package. Like I mentioned, getting into and out of the third row is a bit of torture if you're anything but very young or very small. And, you wouldn't want to sit back there for very long. But yet again, if you have little ones and you need to go pick up their friends, the third row is completely functional and a real option to put kids in. So when I started this, I mentioned the fact that I was a bit torn about this car. It's a car that I sort of really wanted to like. And when I first got into it, I was kind of cheerful about it and thought like, well, this thing, they are doing a better job than they've done. And really, it's pretty nice. And then the more time I spent with it, I was like, but it looks kind of cheesy. It's got cheesy wood trim and like the pieces that you touch don't feel all that great. It looks a little downclass in here. But then if you put in the value proposition and the updated economy and the fact that they've managed to make this thing more slippery on the outside, what I would say is I really didn't come away from it disliking it. What I would say is the best in its class, no. But it does wind up being very good value for money in the marketplace. And as a result, really might actually be worth a look. The other final part I would say, which may sound a bit strange, is because everything in here feels sort of a generation old, you sort of do get the sense that it's going to last. It's not like the bleeding edge of newest technology. And as a result, it's like you have to wonder, because it's been on the market for a while and they've had a chance to probably vet most of the buttons and switches and pieces of this car for a longer period of time than something that would have the newest and the freshest, have they also had a chance to refine them so that they don't break or have problems? You do sort of get the impression that all the parts in here on the car itself are going to last. So with that, Kevin Gordon for Autosavant. Look forward to talking to you guys soon.